Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation as part of the Industry Insight webinar series. The topic today is capturing web pages as evidence, risks, and best practices. Speaking today will be Jeff Eschbach and Alana Harris. The Industry Insight webinar series is hosted by the ABA Legal Technology Resource Center. To stay updated on upcoming webinars or view previous videos, visit ambar.org/industryinsight. You can also stay updated on legal technology news through our blog, www.lawtechnologytoday.org. Jeff Eschbach is the CEO and founder of PAGEVAULT, a company dedicated to bringing cloud-based business solutions to the legal space. PAGEVAULT's flagship product permits lawyers to easily capture web page content in a way that is also highly admissible in court. Jeff has earned 7 patents related to cloud computing and holds advanced degrees in both engineering and business. Alana Harris is a licensed attorney in Illinois and California. She combines her legal experience and journalism background to develop and implement new business opportunities and partnerships with the legal community. Alana also creates and presents CLE presentations for legal professionals, focusing on authenticating online evidence under the federal rules of evidence and best practices for collecting and presenting web evidence in court. Thank you all for joining us. We'll now begin the webinar.
All right, thanks, Rose. This is Jeff here. Before diving into the talk, I want to give a little background on PageVault just for a minute to provide some context for the presentation. We formed the company about 3 years ago specifically to help law firms who need to capture web page content. Out there in the field, we saw lawyers struggling with a lot of different approaches. Sometimes they use standard off-the-shelf tools. It's hard for them to capture images or especially the supporting information they need for legal use. And sometimes they're using tools that were supposedly built for legal use, but it was really difficult for them to learn them. They were complex, or they didn't live up to the marketing hype. So we built PageVault to really be the best of both worlds. We designed something to be very easy to do web page captures and also very admissible, and we've had some great traction over the past couple of years. Now we've got clients that are coast to coast, and we really want to discuss what we've learned over the past couple of years working with them. So the talk's going to be very practical, essentially sharing a lot of what we've seen out there out in the field. So with that, I'll hand it off to Alana.
Thanks, Jeff. So when it comes to capturing and authenticating web page evidence, there are no bright line rules. So without a clear guide from the court, it's important to understand the unique challenges that web evidence presents in order to mitigate these risks and heighten your chances for admissibility. So first, we'll explore the growing importance of web evidence, authenticating web evidence under the federal rules, chain of custody and other risks and concerns, different capture methods and their pros and cons, best practices, and then finally we will demonstrate these concepts with PageVault software. So with that, we'll start with the growing importance of web evidence. Electronically stored information, as we all know, is everywhere, and this includes web content as well. Given the ubiquitous nature of the web, it's no surprise that web page evidence is now a critical source of evidence for attorneys. We're seeing clients use web evidence in copyright infringement cases, trademark disputes, patent battles. Web evidence is also used in personal injury claims. A classic example is a plaintiff claiming severe injuries who was caught posting skydiving pictures on Facebook. It's also used in class action litigation, such as false advertising, family law, someone's on Match.com that shouldn't be, labor and employment law, and the list really just goes on. So the trend is clear. And this graph shows just how often social media is coming up in cases, and as you can see, it's growing exponentially. The bottom line is that attorneys must be aware of how to effectively deal with this content. So with this in mind, let's talk about how you can authenticate web evidence. The Federal Rules of Evidence 901 and its state equivalents deals with authentication. Rule 901A provides a standard for authentication, while Rule 901B offers a non-exhaustive list of ways to meet 901A's standard. We will discuss the approaches most applicable to web page evidence throughout the presentation. So when it comes to web pages in particular, there are 4 common ways to authenticate. The first is a witness with knowledge, an expert witness, distinctive characteristics, and finally, evidence about a process or system. Under Rule 901B1, a witness with personal knowledge can authenticate the content of the web page. The witness here can be the author, owner, or creator of the website. An example here could be the owner of a Facebook page, the sponsor of a blog, or the author of a tweet. The witness can also be the person who viewed and captured the content. However, it's important to note that more and more courts are holding that testimony of the person who simply printed a copy of the web page is insufficient to authenticate. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. The challenges with authenticating web page evidence here is the court's concerned about altering the original content. It's very easy to do this with methods such as Photoshop, and this is particularly true when you're presenting a standard screenshot with no supporting forensic data. Another issue is the witness's ability to authenticate the content when the witness is not the owner or creator. And as I mentioned earlier, courts continue to find that witnesses lack personal knowledge in these circumstances. Finally, attorneys simply don't want to involve their staff in the capturing process. And this is usually due to concerns about their staff's technical competence and also competing interests. The worst case scenario here would be finding yourself in a situation where you have to call your employee to testify. A computer forensic expert can also authenticate the web page under 901(b)(3). What's critical here is that the expert serves as a trusted third party and removes you from the chain of custody. The downside, though, is that retaining an expert is expensive and time-consuming. This is especially true when you compare it to easy do-it-yourself capture methods. In addition, by the time you retain an expert with your request, the content may disappear or change before the expert had the chance to make the capture. Under Rule 901(b)(4, you can authenticate web evidence by evidence of distinctive characteristics along with circumstantial evidence. These can be unique to the purported author of the web page. For example, distinctive characteristics of a Facebook profile page could be photos, the owner's date of birth, hometown, and other relevant information. Metadata fields can also be key circumstantial data to authenticate web pages, and they can also establish distinctive characteristics. The problem with authenticating web page evidence under this rule is that it's very easy to replicate distinctive characteristics and create fake websites or social media accounts to corroborate your theory of the case. And since it's so easy to fake digital content, it is critical to have a forensically accurate copy with all supporting data. Under Rule 901(b)(9, you can authenticate a web page through sufficient evidence of an accurate processor system that can produce a reliable result. This method requires someone with scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge to explain the system's reliability and its accuracy. So in this case, the person may be the software developer or another individual who manages the technology. For example, with our software, PAGEVAULT, our CTO can provide an affidavit that fits squarely within Rule 901(b)(9 because he has specialized technical knowledge of how PAGEVAULT works. The challenges with authenticating web evidence here is that many capture tools simply aren't designed for legal use. It can also be difficult to get the software company to provide a witness or affidavit to attest to their solution's process under the rule.
All right, so now we'll cover some of the key risks associated with authenticating web page evidence. The first one here is the courts themselves are really not consistent. What works for one judge or one jurisdiction may not work for another, so previous success with an approach doesn't really mean that that success will be repeated. This is especially true as we see more and more examples surface of judges rejecting simple screenshots that maybe would have been acceptable in the past. The next one is the output itself. You have to make sure that what you capture actually looks like the web page in the browser. If it doesn't, there's risk of confusing a judge or a witness later. And I'll give an example of this later on in the talk so you can see it visually. The next risk we have is not having enough supporting evidence. I think Alana alluded to this earlier. Of course, more and more want to see more than just the screenshots of the page. They really want to see the metadata as well. Now, we've mentioned metadata a few times here, so to clarify, metadata is data that describes other data. So in this case, it's data describing the web page capture. I'll give you an example here. This is some of the metadata that we used in a recent web page capture of Bill Gates' Facebook page. And you can see some of the data here. It includes the URL, the IP address, date and time, and also some of the information about the actual computing environment itself. So this is the metadata we typically collect when capturing a page. The next risk we've got here, a very common problem, is that web pages can change quickly. So someone can change text or remove a photo from a page in an instant, thinking about social media here. So you really need to capture the relevant web pages when you see them. So delaying too long could be a risk that the content won't be there for you. Tampering is the next one on my list. Because it's so easy to modify digital content today, a simple screenshot really runs the risk of being questioned. So simply doing something like that is going to have people perhaps doubt the authenticity of what you've done. Got another example here we can show here. This is a web capture I did of the New York Times from a few days back. You can see it's got the images, the headlines, things like that. But if I want to, it's really easy to make changes. I could perhaps update the headline to put my name in there, even modify the picture, right? And this only took me a couple of seconds to make these changes. If a person really wanted to put some time in, they could really create a compelling forgery. And the software nowadays is pretty easy to use. You don't have to be a tech genius to make something like this happen. So therefore, what we're saying is really the images alone aren't enough. In the legal space, you need supporting info such as the metadata, and we'll discuss later, it also helps if you have a trusted third party making the captures instead of just yourself. And that's a nice segue into the final risk I have here, which is chain of custody, which is really not just violating chain of custody, but even including yourself in the chain of custody since you're an interested party. And I'll show a few diagrams here to kind of explain that. So first of all, just kind of establishing the protocol here, think of a standard piece of evidence like a thumbprint on a glass. No lawyer would ever go and take that glass, put it up on their shelf in their own office, cross their fingers and hope to get it admitted as evidence 3 or 4 years later when it's needed. They know there's certain protocols to follow by using a trusted third party such as the police, secure storage like an evidence locker, and they follow that if they want to get the evidence into court later. The problem is with web evidence, it's pretty hard to follow that protocol today. We literally do see lawyers that do a print screen, pages come out of their printer, and they put it up on their shelf, and now they're crossing their fingers and hoping they're going to get the content into court years later. So the question is, how do they comply with that protocol, getting that trusted third party, secure storage, to maximize the likelihood of getting the content admitted? And specific to web pages here, go through another diagram kind of showing how that plays out in practice. Think of that being you in the lower left corner there with your computer, and maybe you're surfing back and forth to a social media page like Facebook at the top left there. So you're going back and forth getting the content to your computer. The chain of custody really is going from Facebook server to you, then wherever you store the content. And that squarely puts you squarely in the chain of custody. So now if later on there's questions about the authenticity, you've got to provide an affidavit or testimony, you or your staff are the ones that have to do that. What we're seeing now though is a trusted third party approach really takes that part out of the equation. So we're seeing this frequently where an expert might be employed, a trusted third party expert. And instead of doing the capture yourself, you make the request to them. Now that party is not an interested party, so they're the ones that do the surfing back and forth to Facebook, find the content that's needed. And now the chain of custody will go from the web server like Facebook to that expert, wherever they store the content. Now that expert is now the one that's in the chain of custody. And again, not being an interested party, that's much better. And you and your staff are golden, not having to worry about testifying later. All right, now I'm going to actually talk about some of the specific capture methods that we've seen out there in the field. Kind of building up here, the first one would just be standard printouts you can do. A little better to be screen capture software that's built for this, forensic software for lawyers, forensic experts, and even subpoenas here. So the first one I want to talk about, just standard printouts. This is the ability that comes built into your computer, hitting a print screen button or maybe in a browser just saying print when you have something that you're looking at a web page. On the positive side, this is really simple to do. They're very easy, do it yourself, doesn't take much trouble. But there are a number of cons with this. As we just talked about, if you're doing it yourself, you've now put yourself in the chain of custody. There's manual recording of metadata. Usually these options don't record it, so if you want the IP address, time, other metadata, you've got to take care of that yourself. It can be time consuming for long pages. Think about a long social media page. We've seen folks go out and have to hit print screen, paste it, scroll down a little more, print screen again over and over and over to get the entirety of the page, which can be very frustrating. And finally, the output's often poor. It's literally missing content sometimes. If you just send a print request to your printer, kind of giving an example here of the difference we can see. This would be a capture we did of a Facebook page. You can see it looks exactly as you'd expect it to look in the browser, just in that top level page of a Facebook profile. But when we went to a normal browser and just hit print, this is what came out of our printer. You can see it's disjointed, just broken into pieces. Doesn't really look like what we see in the browser itself. And we've had clients mention that they've gone with approach number 2 before, where they just have a simple printout. They'll show it to a witness and ask them, is this your web page? And the witness responds saying, no, I'm not really sure what you're showing me. I see a bunch of pictures and things here, but no, not my web page. So that really gets to the heart of the problem with just doing a simple printout, not getting all the legal quality outputs that you need. So the next method we often see out there would be off-the-shelf screen capture software. Again, these things are usually built to be pretty easy to use. They'll scroll through the entire web page, crawl through it, and get the entirety of all the images. But again, they're not really built for legal use. So the problems we see is the user is still in the chain of custody if they do it themselves. Limited metadata. The images might look nice, but again, all those IP address, time, things like that aren't there. And even with this software, oftentimes it doesn't look exactly like the web page. We found a number of the packages that are off the shelf still break down the web page into components and try to rebuild it, and at the end of the day, it doesn't look exactly like you saw it in your browser. Continuing up the chain here would be forensic software. This is software that really is more built for legal use. And here, again, it's nice that it captures the entire web page and designed for lawyers, and it gets that metadata and the source files, so the underlying files that help construct the web page itself. So again, from the standpoint of content, this is really meant to get the right stuff that you're going to need for a capture. But on the downside, many of these platforms are really pretty difficult to use. They're built for IT professionals, basically, which means that either you have to have a certain level of expertise, or if you're going to ramp up in-house, it's going to be some high training costs with that. And finally, even with these software solutions, if you employ it in-house, you may still have somebody that works for you who is still now, again, in the chain of custody in case there's a question of authenticity later on. So that kind of leads into getting forensic experts. Go to somebody who's on the outside. These folks have years of experience, a variety of tools at their disposal, so depending on what content you need to capture, they usually know the right approach to get it effectively. And they can serve as that trusted third party. Since they're not an interested party, they're typically outside of your organization. If they make the capture and later on there's an issue, they can provide that affidavit or testimony. Well, as Alana mentioned, though, getting outside experts is expensive, takes time, and the response time can be slow. In the modern world where web content changes quickly, by the time you get them going, it could be too late and the content could be gone. And the final method we're seeing out there is subpoenas. And it's not really a capture method per se, but we see it enough that I wanted to talk about it. This really works when the content that you may have seen before is no longer publicly available. So maybe you went to a site and you saw something, and 3 months later you go back and it's gone. So you want to get a subpoena to the people who host the web content, asking them to produce the content that was there maybe 3 or 4 months ago. So on the pro side, if it's not there, this is the one way you can possibly get access to it. And if it's produced, authentication usually isn't a hurdle. Now on the downside, this approach can be time-consuming and litigious. And when I say litigious, I mean fighting with the people who host the content. Oftentimes, they don't want to get in the practice of just turning over previous content to folks. Also, from the standpoint of privacy, they're often trying to protect the privacy of their own users. So they don't want to get into that regular habit of giving it over. Also, the digital records themselves may be deleted as a matter of policy. So oftentimes, again, with social media, we see that if a user deletes content, they won't hold records of it after a certain amount of time, just to preclude folks coming after them later on with subpoenas.
So we'll now turn to best practices. So now that we understand the risk and explore the different capture methods, we'll walk through best practices from the standard to use, what to capture, and following social media ethics. Courts who have addressed the issue of authenticating web page evidence have yet to establish a uniform approach, making case law on the issue basically clear as mud. Courts are using widely different and even conflicting standards, from the most lenient to the most demanding. Recent decisions suggest courts are even moving away from the lenient standard and rejecting mere printouts. So given these varying standards, taking the most rigorous approach to capturing web pages is best practice. Not only do you not know which court you'll end up in, the courts are also getting smarter when it comes to the risks involved with web content. With a trusted third party, you are taken out of the chain of custody. Now, as mentioned before, a trusted third party can be a forensic expert. In addition, a software solution designed for use with Rule 901(b)(9) can also serve as a trusted third party. Another best practice is ensuring you have secure storage for the web page captures. For digital files, make sure there's hashing and digital signing of captured content. You also want secure, encrypted storage. Alternatively, if your practice is to maintain the physical copies of the captures, you want to make sure that you have a record of the individuals with access to and control over the content to preserve the chain of custody. And as Jeff covered earlier, collecting metadata is critical. If possible, it's best to use a tool that automatically collects metadata at the moment of capture. When in doubt, capture the data. More is better when it comes to metadata, as we've stated before, because it really does serve as a reliable indicator of authenticity. It's also important to collect the HTML and DOM. These are the source files that are used to construct the web page. You can think of them as a kind of recipe used by your browser to generate the web page. And also be aware that source files often contains information that's not visible on the web page. This can actually be a huge benefit because you may get information from the source files that you would not otherwise see on your screen. And as we mentioned before, make sure you capture web pages immediately because content can change in an instant. If you see the content you want, don't save it for a later date. Capture the content before it is removed, modified, or access restricted. We've had many clients who waited to capture a public Facebook page, and when they returned later to make the capture, the page was private and they ended up losing out on critical information. So it's just important that when you see it, when you see what you want, take it then. You also want to consider spoliation. No matter what side you're on, it's important that you begin capturing your client's content as soon as you learn of the lawsuit to protect against future claims of spoliation. You also want to capture the opposing party's content in case that the other party destroys relevant information to your case. Equally important, though, is informing your client about their duty to preserve evidence. Be proactive and tell your client not to delete content. So a plaintiff bringing a personal injury claim should not delete incriminating Facebook photos from their page, no matter how much they harm their damages claim. If they delete it on their own or you instruct them to do so, you both risk sanctions, fines, and other repercussions. It's just a situation you do not want to be put in. Finally, uphold social media ethics. This means don't create fake accounts to friend people to get information. You also want to avoid communications with represented parties. In addition, take caution when communicating with unrepresented third parties. It is, however, okay to create accounts to browse publicly available content. If it's public, it's up for grabs.
Okay, now I'm going to do a short demonstration of PageVault, really to illustrate some of the concepts we just discussed, making a capture, precise images, metadata, things like that. I'm going to quickly show, though, what makes PageVault special. Just a couple slides here. Essentially, that PageVault can act as a trusted third party, even though you're using the software yourself. So again, we've already kind of teed up the idea of trusted third party and the value there. Again, making a request to them and having them make the capture puts you outside of the chain of custody, right? What we've done with PageVault is, instead of having an expert, we've got PageVault itself as software that's running in the cloud. So the PageVault capture tool, which looks and feels just like a browser, is running on a computer that's under our control, that's kind of locked down to prevent tampering. So what you really do is you remote control PageVault. So PageVault can be a browser, you remote control it, and when the capture is made, since it's on our computer, the chain of custody will really go from the server like Facebook to PageVault, and then from PageVault to where we store it. And that means PageVault itself is what's in the chain of custody, leaving you as the user, again, golden and not involved there. So I'm going to show you PageVault in action, but it just helps to understand that when I'm doing the browsing session, and you'll see it, we make a capture, that entire process is really going on in a cloud-based computer that's under PageVault's control. So at the end of the day, if necessary, we can provide an affidavit to testify to the process and give more credibility to the authenticity of what's captured. So I'll go ahead and I'll fire up a quick demo here of PageVault. So for our users, they're going to normally see a little lock icon here on their desktop. You would essentially think of that as a way to start the PageVault browser. So I'll click on that, and there are two key parts to PageVault. One is a portal viewer to see captures you made later, but the heart of it is to go to our capture mode, which again essentially is firing up a browser that you can serve to whatever content you want and make a capture. So started up PageVault here, I'll go to google.com. I think I'll type in something like news, and again, this is just functioning just like any other browser. I'll go to news. Search what you want, click. I'll go here, and let's maybe say that this page, for some reason, there's content that we'd want to see. Scroll down to take a quick look at it. So with PageVault, when you've surfed what you want and you finally see the content, you go to our button up here that says capture. It's easy, just clicking on that. And the two options we've got are single screen, which means we'll make a capture of exactly what you see in the screen just now, or scrolling, which means we'll scroll through the entirety of the page, what's been put into the browser, and we'll go through and make a series of screenshots to capture all the content we see in that page. So in this case, I'll put it in the folder called background research. I'll do a scrolling capture to store that away. What I should say, over here you'll see that there are a number of folders here. Usually our clients make different folders for different case matters. So every time you get a new case, make a new folder, and you can put the series of captures in there. So in this case, I'm going to make this scrolling capture in our background research folder. I'll hit save. PageVault does its thing, automatically scrolling through, making a series of screenshots. And we're also getting the underlying HTML and DOM files which are necessary, capturing all the metadata. I'll quickly surf, I think, to another page here. Maybe I'll just go to I'll try to go to a Facebook page here. We've got one with Bill Gates. I'll scroll down a little bit here to see something interesting maybe. So again, just functioning like a browser. Maybe this shot here is something interesting. So I'll go and do another capture. This time I'll do a single screen. I'm just going to capture exactly what I see in the window itself right now. Hit save. PageVault just gets a shot of this page. I'll also do a quick scrolling capture even on this one. I'll go from the top of the page to where we are now and just do another scroll through, so just showing capturing a Facebook page. All right, so now as PageVault finishes doing its thing, again doing the series of screenshots, getting the metadata, I'm going to take us over to the portal, and this is where we store all of our screen captures. So for any client we'd have, they can go to any one of these folders here. I'll hit refresh real quick. So I think we put our captures in the background research folder. I could go in there and I'll see here are the 3 captures we just made. I'll click on this first one and you can see automatically the metadata was captured about this. If I scroll down, you can see the series of screen captures that were made by PageVault automatically. I'll go up top here, maybe I'll download a PDF version. Oh, notice that you can download a PDF and the source files, including the HTML and the DOM. But I'll download the PDF to my desktop and you can see an example of what the HTML actually looks like. So if I open it up here, you'll see the first page. It's got the metadata, and then as I scroll down, you see I'm not sure what's going on there. The different images of the screen capture. I'll shut that down, and I'll go back to our portal. Go back to that folder that we were just in for background research. Here's a shot we made, that single image shot of Bill Gates' page. You can see again the metadata is automatically captured. I scroll down and you'll see it's just a single image as requested, exactly what we saw in the page at that time. And I'll go back maybe to this first one here. This was the scrolling capture we did at Facebook. And again, if I scroll down, you see a series of screenshots as PageVault automatically went through, kind of gobbling up all the different images there. So getting the entirety of the page, and you'll notice that the pages look exactly as they did in the browser, so there's no question about what's being represented. And finally, if I want to download a PDF again, I can do that and take a quick peek. Metadata is on the first page. As I scroll down, sorry about that, I'll see the different screenshots that were made by PageVault here in this PDF viewer in Acrobat. So, with that, just wrapping up the demo, I wanted to show examples here where we saw that with the capture tool, images looked exactly like they did in the browser, metadata automatically captured, the HTML and DOM files were available, and these are all the things you want if you want to have a very legally defensible or forensically defensible web page capture. And then to wrap up, the nice thing here is, again, because PageVault actually did all this on its own computer, it actually wasn't running locally. That means that in the future, if an affidavit's ever needed, we could provide one of those that speaks to our process that really kept the user out of the chain of custody and just went from the web server to us before being stored away.